Hello my friends. In this episode, I will show you 10 scary unsolved mysteries that happened on Halloween. Halloween is the one night of the year where being scared is supposed to be fun. However, amidst all the harmless activity like trick-or-treating, sometimes really scary and disturbing things can happen. October 31st was the date of some horrific murders and unexplained disappearances far more terrifying than any ghouls, goblins, or witches. Given that they take place on Halloween, the following mysteries have an added aura of horror, and remain unsolved to this day. 10. The murder of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman. Sometime during the early morning hours of Halloween 1981, a Manhattan couple named Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were murdered in their apartment, which was located near Greenwich Village. The couple were severely beaten before being shot in the head, execution style, and the apartment was completely ransacked. Sisman was rumored to be involved in drugs, so authorities initially believed that was the motive for the killings. However, the case took a bizarre turn when a prison informant claimed that one of his fellow inmates had somehow predicted the crime weeks before it actually happened. This inmate turned out to be none other than the notorious son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz. In 1977, Berkowitz was convicted of a series of shootings that claimed the lives of 6 victims and injured 7 others. There has always been speculation that Berkowitz was involved in a satanic cult and did not commit all of the son of Sam murders alone. According to the informant, Berkowitz told him that his cult was planning to enter a residence near Greenwich Village on Halloween. They would perform a ritual murder by shooting a couple in the head before ransacking the place to remove incriminating evidence. When Berkowitz was asked about this, he claimed that Sisman had footage from one of the son of Sam shooting incidents and was planning to turn it over to authorities to avoid some drug charges. Although no evidence was found to support Berkowitz's claims, he provided an eerily accurate description of Sisman's apartment. No one knows if the murder of Sisman and Platzman has anything to do with the son of Sam case, but it remains unsolved. 9. Hyun-Jung Song Cindy has disappeared. Hyun-Jung Cindy Song was a 21-year-old South Korean student studying at Pennsylvania State University. In 2001, she dressed up as a bunny and attended a Halloween party at a state college nightclub. After leaving the club, Cindy spent the next few hours hanging out with her friends before being dropped off at her apartment at 4 a.m. This was the last person to ever see her. After Cindy was reported missing, a search was conducted of her apartment. There was no sign of any struggle, but several of her belongings, including false eyelashes from her costume, were there, indicating that she had gone inside after being taken down. But what happened to her after that? Shortly thereafter, a witness reported seeing a woman who looked like Cindy in Philadelphia's Chinatown. This woman was inside a car with an unidentified man and screaming for help. A strange move came in 2003 when a Luzerne County man named Hugo Marcus Selinsky was arrested after the remains of 5 people were found buried in his backyard. Although none of these remains belonged to Cindy, an informant told police that Selinsky and an accomplice, Michael Jason Kurkowski Jr., kidnapped her. After raping and killing Cindy, the 2 men allegedly buried her body elsewhere. Kurkowski's remains were found in Selinsky's backyard, and the informant claimed that Kurkowski was killed because he kept Cindy's rabbit ears as a souvenir. To date, no evidence has been found linking Selinsky to Cindy's disappearance, but in January 2014, the cremated remains of dozens of people were found buried on his property. It remains to be seen whether any of them will be identified as Cindy Song. 8. The murder of Grace Louise Carter. On Halloween night in 1977, the parents of 19-month-old Nema Louise Carter put their baby girl into her crib at their home in Lawton, Oklahoma. The next morning, Nema's parents were shocked to discover that she was missing. Since the windows in Nima's bedroom were closed, it was assumed that her kidnapper was hiding in the closet and snuck the child out of the house while her parents were sleeping in the living room. A month later, a group of children were playing in an abandoned house 4 blocks from Carter's home. When they opened the home's refrigerator, they were shocked when a decomposed baby's body fell out. The child was identified as Nima Louise Carter, who died of suffocation. A similar crime occurred in Luton in April 1976 when a young woman lured 3-year-old twin sisters, Mary and Tina Carpenter, from their home and forcibly held them inside a freezer in a derelict house. Last. When the sisters were found 2 days later, Mary had suffocated, but Tina had managed to survive. Tina identifies her kidnapper as a local teenage babysitter named Jacqueline Robideau. However, the child's age made her testimony unreliable and there was not enough supporting evidence to bring charges at the time. Jacqueline Robideau eventually became Nima Louise Carter's babysitter. She was an obvious suspect after Nima's murder, but again, there was no evidence to implicate her. Years later, Robideau was finally charged with Mary Carpenter's murder and sentenced to life in prison. She died in prison of liver cancer in 2005 but never confessed to the still unsolved murder of Nima Louise Carter. 7. The murder of Chaim Weiss. Chaim Weiss was a 15-year-old Orthodox Jewish boy attending Mesivta in Long Beach, a religious high school in New York. The morning after Halloween in 1986, the entire school was horrified when Chaim was found murdered on the floor of his dorm room. He was beaten to death after a blunt blow to his skull and stabbed repeatedly in the head, but the murder weapon was nowhere to be found. Since there was no evidence of a struggle, it seemed likely that Chaim was murdered in his bed while he slept before his body was taken to the ground. By all accounts, Chaim was a very popular boy, so no one could figure out a possible motive for the crime. There were indications that the killer was familiar with the religious customs of Orthodox Judaism. Although it was a cold night, the window of Chaim's room was open, a custom often done to allow the spirit of a deceased person to escape. After the murder, one of the school's rabbis left a memorial candle to burn in Chaim's room. 2 days later, a second candle appeared, but no one admitted to putting it there. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere, suggesting that the killer may have been familiar with the dormitory. During the night, another student on Chaim's floor recalled waking up momentarily when his room door opened before immediately closing again. Is it possible that the killer entered the wrong room initially by mistake? After 28 years, authorities have never been able to find a suspect or any answers as to why Chaim Weiss was killed in such a brutal way. 6. Orange Socks Identity. On Halloween 1979, the unidentified body of a young woman was found in a concrete culvert near Interstate 35, outside Georgetown, Texas. The victim appears to be in her 20s, and was sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. It seems likely that she was murdered on the same day and the only unique clue to her identity was an oval-shaped silver ring on her hand. The victim was naked, and the only clothing she was wearing was a pair of orange socks. Since the young woman was never identified, Orange Stockings became her nickname. Years later, serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to killing Orange Stockings. He even stated that he had sex with her corpse after she died. But Lucas did not know the woman's identity. He claimed he picked her up while he was moving and only remembered that her name was Joni or Judy. After being sentenced to death for the woman's murder in 1984, Lucas recanted his confession in order to reduce his sentence. In fact, further investigation showed that Lucas was likely working in Florida on the day of the murder. Lucas was known for repeatedly confessing to murders he never committed, and no one is sure how many people he actually killed. Henry Lee Lucas died in prison in 2001, but Orange Socks isn't the only unidentified murder victim he was connected to. 5. Walker County Jane Doe. On the morning of November 1, 1980, a truck driver discovered the naked body of a teenage girl next to Interstate 45 outside Huntsville in Walker County, Texas. The victim was sexually assaulted before being beaten and strangled to death. Because the little girl was never identified, she became known simply as Jane Doe of Walker County. It is estimated that she was murdered several hours before her discovery, and this girl's interesting backstory began when witnesses came forward to report their interactions with her on Halloween night. After an unknown man let her out of the car at the nearby South End Gulf Station, Jane Doe reportedly asked several from people gave directions to Ellis Unit Prison, claiming she was planning to visit a friend there. However, when her photo was circulated among the inmates of the Ellis Unit, no one admitted to knowing her. Later that night, a waitress at a truck stop had a similar conversation with Jane Doe. The girl claimed to be 19 years old and from the Aransas Pass area, apparently implying that her parents did not care about her. Since this girl was murdered exactly 1 year after the Orange Stockings murder and there were many similarities between the two crimes, Henry Lee Lucas was considered a possible suspect. However, there was absolutely no evidence linking Lucas to the murder, and Walker County's Jane Doe remains unidentified. 4. The murder of Marvin Brandland. In 1982, 69-year-old Marvin Brandland lived with his wife, Ethel, in Fort Dodge, Iowa. On Halloween of that year, the Brandlands were handing out candy to trick-or-treaters who came to their house. At some point, they opened the door and were surprised to see a man wearing a mask. He said, "Trick or treat. Give me your money or I'll shoot." The Brandlands thought someone was playing a Halloween prank and tried to remove the man's mask, but he wouldn't let them. Instead, the masked man entered the house and pulled out a gun. He told the couple to take him downstairs and give him all the money they had. He hid it in their safe. The Brandlands became suspicious because very few people knew they had a safe in the basement of their house. For this reason, Marvin was still convinced that a friend or family member was simply playing a Halloween trick on them. When the masked man drove, the Brandlands crossed the kitchen toward the basement. Marvin grabbed the gun. The intruder ended up shooting Marvin in the throat before fleeing the house and inexplicably leaving his mask behind. Ethel was so traumatized by her husband's death that she died just a few months later. Over the years it was alleged that an acquaintance of the Brandland family was bragging about committing the murder, so DNA testing was performed on the mask. However, there was not enough usable material to conduct a proper test, so there is still no evidence to charge this suspect. Marvin Brandland's murder remains officially unsolved. 3. Death of newborn Key West. On the morning of October 31, 2004, a housekeeper at the Hilton Resort and Marina in Key West, Florida, found something in the trash can in the ladies' room down the hall. She may have initially assumed it was a Halloween prank, but the situation became truly horrific once she realized she had found the body of a newborn baby girl. The baby girl still had her umbilical cord and placenta attached to her body, indicating that someone had recently given birth to this girl and decided to throw her in the trash. It did not take the authorities long to figure out who was responsible. Hours earlier, a young pregnant woman and 3 of her male companions were seen walking in the hotel lobby. I entered the ladies' room while the men were waiting outside. One time, a witness walked into the bathroom and heard the pregnant woman moaning inside the stall. When the witness asked the 3 men if they knew the woman, one of them claimed to be her friend. He even called her name at one point, which sounded like Samantha or Sonia. The pregnant woman remained in the bathroom for about 40 minutes and the security guard saw her holding her stomach when she came out. When the guard asked her if she was okay, he was told that she had fallen ill from partying too much at the nearby Fantasy Fest. The 4 individuals were escorted out of the hotel, but the child was not discovered until the morning. Fingerprints, blood samples, and DNA evidence were taken from the bathroom and compared to several suspects, including Casey Anthony. However, the mother and 3 men have not yet been identified, and no one has been prosecuted for the newborn's death. 2. The mysterious death of Chris Jenkins. Chris Jenkins was a 21-year-old student from the University of Minnesota who visited a bar in downtown Minneapolis on Halloween night in 2002. After leaving the bar around midnight, Chris disappeared without a trace. He remained missing for 4 months until his body was discovered in the Mississippi River. Since Chris was still wearing his Halloween costume, all indications are that he died shortly after his disappearance. Chris was heavily intoxicated that night, and since his cause of death was drowning, authorities initially believed it was an accident or suicide. His parents refused to believe it and pushed for a more thorough investigation. Finally, in 2006, the death was reclassified as a homicide. While authorities withheld specific details, they claimed that one of the jailed suspects told them he was present when Chris was killed and thrown off the bridge into the river. Although the police believe this man's story is credible, no charges have ever been brought against him. However, one possible theory is that Chris Jenkins could have been a victim in the mysterious, smiley face murders. During this time period, approximately 40 college students in the United States became victims of a bizarre series of drowning deaths. In some of these cases, unexplained smiley face graffiti was found near the body of water where the victim drowned. This has led some to assume that these deaths are connected to each other and that the victims were drugged before being thrown into a body of water to make their deaths appear like accidental drowning. Although no smiley face graffiti has been found in connection with Chris Jenkins' death, investigators can't overlook the similarities between it and several other unsolved cases. 1. The disappearance of Stephen DeMond. On Halloween 1955, Marilyn DeMond took her 2-year-old son Stephen and 7-month-old daughter Pamela to a supermarket in East Meadow, New York. While she went shopping, Marilyn let Stephen wait outside the store with his sister, who was inside a cart. 10 minutes later, Marilyn came out of the store and was shocked to discover that Stephen and the cart were missing. Shortly thereafter, the vehicle was discovered a block and a half away. However, although Pamela was left inside the carriage, Stephen was nowhere to be found. He has not been seen since. In many cases where infants are kidnapped, it is assumed that the perpetrator wanted a child of his own and decided to raise the missing infant under a new name. Over the years, DNA testing has been used in an attempt to determine whether Stephen DeMond has acquired a new identity. At some point, investigators noticed that Stephen bore a resemblance to the infamous boy in the box, an unidentified child who was found murdered inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia in 1957. However, DNA testing would eventually confirm that Stephen and the boy in the box, they were not the same person. In 2009, a Michigan man named John Barnes came forward thinking he might be Stephen, but DNA testing also ruled that out. It's possible that Stephen Damon is living another life somewhere under a different identity, unaware that he was taken from his real family. However, his whereabouts remain unknown. Before we finish, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive new videos, and do not forget to leave us your comment about the story that left an impact with you. See you in a new video.